This is Ilkley Moor, my childhood playground. And down there, the town where I was born and brought up. You know, when I was a nipper, I used to come and stand on these rocks here and look down over Wharfdale and wonder how the dickens it came to be so beautiful.
I'd no idea then that the answer was beneath my feet, that the landscape itself held clues which revealed an astonishing 3 billion year story. I could never have guessed that the place I was born was once submerged in a warm tropical sea, or that a hot and humid swamp had covered the whole of the Dales. And who would have thought that our rich green countryside had been a baking desert, before flipping to the other extreme, solid ice. Our country's history has been one of ever-changing climate, so extraordinary that it was beyond the wildest imaginings of my 8-year-old self.
I'd no idea then about the fact that the British Isles had seen ice ages and tropical rainforests, coral seas and deserts. That was all long, long ago. And what of the future? Will it hold fire and tempest, or a big freeze, or global warming? Well, the simple answer is, we just don't know.
But one thing that is pretty certain is that Britain's future will be as surprising as its past. Predicting exactly what tomorrow will bring is a bit of a dark art. With no crystal ball or time machine, how can you look into the future? Well, I've already discovered how the countryside holds clues to what's happened, but can it also hold clues to what's going to happen? Time to head to the Lake District.
This is Ullswater, one of my favourite lakes, and like all of them, it's surrounded by powerful scenery. The scenery is evidence of the last dramatic climate change, the last ice age, when these fells were exposed and the lake scoured out, when Britain was more like the Arctic. The lakes also have clues to more recent climate changes, changes that are still happening today, and the evidence for them, just over there.
These bashful flowers have a secret to tell, and they're no ordinary daffodils.
For a start, there are wild native daffodil, also known as the Lent lily, a wonderful delicate flower, much more elegant than those big fat garden hybrids.
And these particular daffs are also the most famous in the world. They provided inspiration for one of our greatest poets.
I wandered, lonely as a cloud, that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. It was these daffodils beside this very lake that were fluttering and dancing in the breeze when William Wordsworth stumbled upon them.
But for me, what's really important is when Wordsworth found these flowers, and I know that to the day, thanks to his sister's diary.
On April the 15th, 1802, Dorothy Wordsworth wrote, "When we were in the woods beyond Gowbarrow Park," that's just over there, "we saw a few daffodils close to the waterside. We fancied that the lake had floated the seeds ashore." While the Wordsworths were here in the middle of April, 200 years on, I'm here in the middle of March. These daffs are flowering 1 month earlier, and they're not alone.
Many of our spring flowers are springing up early, and it's a hint of what the future might hold. You can see it happening in your own backyard. Everything just seems to flower sooner than it did when I first started gardening. Even our woodland bluebells are ringing the changes. When I was a kid, they always flowered for my birthday in early May, but these days it's mid to late April when this azure carpet rolls out over the forest floor.
In fact, 200 species of wildflower are blooming 2 weeks earlier than they were in the 1950s. But this trend isn't just restricted to flowers. Other spring events are happening earlier too.
As the season shifts forward, trees are also bursting into life ahead of schedule. And it's not just spring that's on the move. At the other end of the year, Keats' season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, autumn, seems to be arriving later. When I was growing up, I spent many an autumn day raking up leaves to stuff me homemade Guy Fawkes in preparation for November the 5th. But these days, kids have to use newspaper. Because even on bonfire night, most leaves are still on the trees. Across the globe, pollution is on the increase, and that could lead to the thermometer rising higher than ever before. Power stations, factories and endless millions of cars pump out an ever-increasing amount of dangerous gases. It's the same for fridges and air conditioners too. And all these gases end up in the upper atmosphere, where they trap the Earth's heat, acting just like the glass in a greenhouse. This is global warming. So where better to discover what that could mean for our landscape than in one of the biggest greenhouses in the world, Cornwall's Eden Project. Each biome holds plants which are perfectly adapted to suit climates that are different from ours. Might plants like these soon be growing in our countryside?
This is the dry zone. There's no rain in here, except when the powers that be decide to turn on the sprinklers. But all these plants are capable of resisting drought. Their entire lives revolve around saving water. They have various ways of doing it. Succulents, like this aloe, have fleshy leaves that act as water storage organs, and they can live off that in dry periods. Other plants reduce the size of their leaves to save water and coat them with silvery, silky hairs that act like windbreaks and stop them drying out even more. Quite nifty. You don't have to be small to survive without water, but if you're as tall as this date palm, you have to work out a way of extracting every last drop of moisture from the soil, and it does that by sending its roots down for tens of metres. Now, if, as predicted, by global warming our summers become hotter and drier, then our trees are not nearly so well equipped as the date to survive.
There's one particular type of forest which is especially sensitive to the effects of this new heat wave, and perhaps not surprisingly, it's only found in our coldest corners, up in the Highlands of Scotland. This is the Caledonian pine forest, the most ancient type of woodland in Britain, and a strange and almost primeval environment. It's one of the last refuges for two of our rarest animals. the wild cat, much stockier than your average tabby. And there's the most famous grouse of them all, the capercaillie. It's been here since the end of the last ice age, a living remnant of much chillier times. This really is a unique community of plants and animals. It's a community that depends on 3 key species.
The birch, the gnarled and the knotty Scots pine, and the rugged, shrubby juniper, all of them capable of coping with intense cold. The birch does it by shedding its leaves and shutting down all systems for the winter, and the pine and the juniper by adapting their leaves into these fine needles that lose much less moisture than a big floppy leaf, and their sap contains the plant equivalent of antifreeze, so they don't go rock solid in the winter.
These specialist powers have enabled the trees and shrubs of the Caledonian forest to survive here for thousands of years, where less resilient plants have failed. But these powers could now be their undoing. They're so suited to the cold that as Britain warms up, the Caledonian pine forest may not be able to cope.
If global warming does turn up the heat, then its days may be numbered. And by the end of the century, it could look like this.
But as the new heat wave marks the end of an era for some, it opens up new possibilities for others. A future Britain could be home to all sorts of new plants and animals, and some might well arrive with a little help from us. A single port like this one at Felixstowe deals with almost 3 million containers a year. That's over 300 every single hour, day and night, arriving from every part of the globe. And this is just one of the many gateways into Britain. Goods arrive on planes, trains and automobiles, as well as 1,000-foot-long container ships. But these giant metal boxes can also bring all sorts of unwanted visitors.
These guys have one of the most important jobs in Britain. They're looking for one of the most dangerous animals in the world, and there could be one in this very container.
Their target is a serial killer, and it can kill in vast numbers. It's not fussy about its choice of prey, and it's so dangerous that if it's found alive, it's destroyed immediately.
And this is what they're looking for. Not a pretty sight, but it hardly looks like a vicious killer, does it? And yet this is the larvae of this, the Asian longhorn beetle. And between them, they could change our landscape beyond recognition. How? They kill trees by the million.
Each female beetle will chew through the bark of any tree to lay up to 60 eggs. It's the grubs that then hatch which do the real damage, feasting on the heartwood. They're not much more than a sausage with teeth, but an infestation will weaken and eventually kill the host tree. A full-scale invasion by these nasty creatures could go a long way to destroying our forests, and Britain would look a sorry sight indeed.
So far, the Asian longhorned beetle has failed to get past security. But it'll be only a matter of time before it does, because this place is so vast that it's just like looking for a needle in a haystack.
As Britain warms up, more and more foreign pests will be able to survive here.
So it's going to be one long hot summer then, eh? Well, not necessarily. Look at this.
Good afternoon to you. Just couldn't believe it how things changed. Not so long ago, early September, it was like this. It was clear blue skies, unbroken sunshine. The temperatures had soared. We'd had 5 consecutive days with temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, a record-breaking 43 degrees Celsius, 110 Fahrenheit there at Faversham. And what's more, there'd been 8 weeks without any rain at all. Now look at it. It's hardly stopped raining. In fact, this is the 33rd day we've had torrential downpours across many parts of the country. So it's hardly surprising that many, many rivers are on a very high flood risk. And in fact, many rivers have burst their banks. We do have severe flooding in many parts of the country. So the advice to motorists really is to stay at home, or certainly to check before you make what needs to be a really essential journey. And if that wasn't enough, things are going to get worse, because in the next few days it's going to get windier and windier. There'll be gales, severe gales, storm force winds even, together with that heavy rain, and there might be the odd tornado thrown in for good measure. And that's the weather for now.
As well as hot, drought-ridden summers, global warming will bring wet and stormy winters. Winter rainfall could increase by 30%, with the downpours becoming much more intense. With so much rain falling in such a short space of time, Britain's countryside could be heading for a flooded future. In the last few years, many of our rivers have reached the highest levels ever recorded, and it's a problem that's probably going to get worse. Really major floods, the sort that in the past happened only once or twice in a century, might now sweep across our islands as often as every 10 years. It's a trend that already seems to be happening. But they say it's nice weather for ducks. Though I'm not quite sure that the ducks would agree. It's not just rain that these frequent storms could bring. Gale force winds may become 5 times more common, and they'll force everyone to hunker down. If high winds and even tornadoes bully their way across the British Isles, the sea would be whipped up to ever greater heights. Throughout the winter, our shores would be pounded and pummeled by this relentless surf. For one corner of Britain, these future frequent storms could be the last straw. The village of Haysborough in Norfolk has been getting smaller in recent years, as the winter waves steadily eat away at the soft earth. The sea has already devoured huge chunks of the cliff, taking a road and at least 6 houses to a watery grave. In an attempt to fend off the forces of nature, 4,000 tons of boulders have been brought in and lined up along the beach front. Unfortunately, yet more cliff was eroded away in the process. But these stony sentinels should help to absorb the worst of the sea's fury, for a while at least. But it's not just the rage of the storms that threatens this coastline. Global warming could bring another, far more insidious danger. 3/4 of the world's fresh water is locked up in ice. That's 7 million cubic miles of H2O. But the ice is melting, fast. As the greenhouse effect takes hold, more than 90% of the world's glaciers from the Alps to the Andes are shrinking. And yet all these glaciers account for only 6% of the Earth's ice. Much more is found in the frozen landscapes of Greenland and Antarctica. Already, vast chunks of polar ice, sometimes up to half the size of Yorkshire, are breaking off and melting. There's no doubt about it. The amount of water in the world's oceans is increasing, and that means the sea level is on the rise. And this could have a big impact on some of our most famous coastal landscapes, places like Morecambe Bay.
I'm with Cedric Robinson, the Queen's Guide to the Sands of the Bay. For all Morecambe Bay looks beautiful, it's actually one of the most dangerous spots in Britain. The tides rise so fast and the quicksand is so treacherous that hundreds of people have lost their lives in the bay. My life, and the Queen's if she were here, would be in Cedric's hands. I'd better keep up.
This beautiful bay is made up of over 120 square miles of mudflats. Each and every day they're shifted and shaped by the tide, which is why it takes an expert eye like Cedric's to navigate a safe passage. But Cedric might be out of a job soon, along with all those who depend on the bay for their livelihood. These fertile sediments have provided a living for countless generations of people and birds alike. But with sea levels possibly rising by 2 feet, the tides could permanently cover up these rich sands. By the end of this century, the ebb and flow, which has provided a rhythm to the life of the bay's inhabitants for thousands of years, might eventually overwhelm them. Then, Morecambe Bay's 250,000 birds would have to find somewhere else to feed. All over the British Isles, the sea could encroach ever further inland, threatening the livelihoods of 4 million people. And nowhere more so than the low-lying lands of southeast England. For more than 2 decades, the Thames Barrier has been the front line of defence against waters that threaten to drown the capital. Its steel gates, weighing 1,500 tonnes each, are drawn up whenever a dangerously high tide is on the way, something that seems to be happening more and more often each year. But in the very worst case scenario, even the Thames Barrier would be overwhelmed. If the ice of Antarctica really goes into meltdown, the outline of Britain could be transformed by a sea level rise of more than 20 feet. Nelson would return to the sea as London became our very own Atlantis.
Fiver on the nose of global sunrise, please. Is that a good bet?
That's the winner. Very good.
You reckon?
That's the winner.
We'll see.
A 20-foot sea level rise is a real outsider at 1,000 to 1, but a 2-foot rise is a much safer bet at only 4 to 1. Wetter winters come in at 2 to 1, while warmer summers, well, no bookie would offer anything other than evens.
Pip to the post again. I like a flutter as much as the next man, you know, but if you to ask me just how warm Britain would get or how much land would be flooded, well, I think I'd keep my money in my wallet.
Only time will tell exactly how Britain's countryside will be changed by global warming. The only certainty is that the Earth is getting hotter.
But there is just an outside chance that as the world becomes warmer, Britain could become colder. For those of you like backing a long shot, it could be worth a gamble.
Some people think that we could be racing towards not a Mediterranean summer, but a big freeze. How very different a day at the races would be then. Global warming leading to an icy Britain? Just our luck. It's all to do with the Gulf Stream. This current of warm water from the tropics keeps us 10 degrees Celsius warmer than our northerly position deserves. But if enough cold water is released by the melting Arctic, then the Gulf Stream could slow or even stop. And that could cause the beginning of a very big chill. It's hard to fathom how we'd cope with such relentless cold. Even a few inches of snow seem to paralyse some of Britain's roads today. Imagine trying to get to work if it snowed every day for 6 months of the year. Leaves on the line would be the least of our rail worries, and cross-channel ferries would need to be replaced with icebreakers. Even the Thames would freeze over in winter as our northerly position took effect. And how would our wildlife cope with weather like this? Well, for some, it might be a welcome arrival. Ptarmigan have clung on in Britain since the last ice age and are well adapted to cold conditions which these days they find only on the highest mountains in Scotland. They'd find a colder Britain much more to their liking and a welcome relief from our recent mild winters. Mountain hares with their thick fur coats would also stay warm enough to cope with temperatures well below freezing. But not everyone would cope so well. For most of our plants and animals, this endless winter would be a disaster. But the real concern is that this big chill could actually lead us into a new ice age. As winter snowfalls get heavier, a vicious circle could set in. Colder winters mean more snow, which in turn makes colder winters, and so on. Britain might become iced over. a frozen Britain would look just as it did only 15,000 years ago.
It's bitterly cold and absolutely silent. A featureless landscape, a panorama of ice and snow.
Of course, it would take years before Britain was covered by this much ice. But eventually, our green and rolling landscape would disappear under a vast, frozen wasteland.
The Cairngorms, the Pennines, Snowdonia. There'd be glaciers like this on all of them.
The British landscape we know today, sculpted by the last ice age, would once again be scraped, scarred and reshaped by the tremendous power of the ice.
But any future glaciers would be gouging their way down valleys that millions of us have occupied for generations. Just imagine what kind of debris they'd be turning up.
Any future ice age would sweep away the trappings of our modern lives with ruthless efficiency. And who knows what kind of landscape would be revealed when that ice finally melts. The chances are that the next ice age is a long way off, but whether it's 500, 5,000 or 50,000 years into the future, the ice will return one day. Whether it's global warming or the big freeze, whatever the future brings for the British Isles, it will be yet another chapter in a long and epic history. In this series, we've travelled through 3 billion years of that history to witness ancient events that rocked Britain. Events which ultimately created the land we call home. For me, it's been an extraordinary journey of discovery. I'd never dreamt that Britain had seen so much change. As I've followed the story of Britain's creation from one end of the country to the other, it's also been a reminder of what a spectacular place the British Isles really are. And what a wealth of wildlife lives within this pattern of islands. Ever since humans first made the British Isles their home, our relationship with the countryside has become ever more important as we ourselves have grown in numbers from a handful of hunter-gatherers to a population of millions. We've stamped our mark on the countryside in so many ways. Far into the future, great natural events will again rock the foundations of the British Isles, but for the time being, it's us, you and me, who are shaping the immediate future of the country. This is where we make our homes, raise our families, and meet with our friends. The British Isles are a special place.
I mean, just look. We live in the most beautiful group of islands with a matchless variety of plants and animals and scenery. And whether your little bit of landscape is down in the town or out in the open countryside, don't just sit there and look at it on the telly. Come out here, smell it, touch it, feel it, get up close to it and among it, and you'll learn to love it and to care for it.
As this is the last programme in the series, I want to finish by showing you the sorts of things people are doing up and down the country, looking after the landscape and simply getting out there and enjoying it. There are thousands of different conservation projects across Britain that you can get involved in, and they all make a difference. Here in the Somerset Levels, the historic wetland is wonderful just to explore, but it's not a wilderness, it's a man-made landscape. For 2,000 years, the priority has been agriculture, draining the land to make it more productive. Now, priorities are changing, and water is being reintroduced to expand wetland areas as wildlife conservation has become more important. And that's where the volunteers come in. They're not experts, they're just ordinary local folk.
These are the Avalon Marshes near Glastonbury. And for about the last 15 years, the locals have been working hard and they're turning them back into what they looked like about 2,000 years ago.
As the water level rises in reserves like this one, a major task is to remove the birch trees, the mosses and grasses that grow better in the wet, bring in many more insects which birds and other wildlife feed on.
I remember coming out here about 10 years ago and the warden showing us a little tiny bit of heather which had come back, it had come out of the seed bank. And now you're just treading on it everywhere.
It's my chance to get out and about, really. Sometimes at the end of the day, when you look at what you've done and you seem to have made a real difference, and you can say, well, you know, I've done that and I've done my bit, and yeah, there's a lot of satisfaction out of that.
As the Avalon Marshes are being returned to wetlands, they've also become a perfect place to learn about this fragile environment.
Have you ever been anywhere like this before?
No.
So why do you think this is special? What do you like about it?
Because you get to learn
and it's got new
things.
things.
Yeah, and it's
different
got
names
lots
for
of different
plants.
flowers. And
But can you remember them all? Because people always tell me I can't remember the names of the flowers. Moss.
heather.
Moss and heather. And what we got here? Coming up. Coming up. Cotton grass. Since this particular piece of conservation work began, the marsh here has really come alive with plants and insects, and that means in turn that it encourages more animals and birds. Right now, around 150,000 starlings are coming into roost, and by the end of the winter, that'll be up in millions.
So if you want to get out and get your hands dirty on the conservation side of things, there's a lot going on out there, and not just in Somerset. This is the RSPB's Nature Reserve at Rainham Marshes in Essex. It's a brand new reserve which should be open to the public in the next year or so. The marshes here are already teeming with life, so the work of the volunteers here is to make the site more accessible and visitor-friendly.
It was an army base, you know, this is where they did all their target practice. But ever since I've been here, we've never, found a few odd stray bullets, and that's been about it.
So I'm a keen bird watcher. I grew up overlooking the marshes, so it's my chance to sort of put something into the community.
Even if you live in a big town, there's going to be something you can get involved in. Here in Brighton, volunteers are making a wildlife garden from scratch in a sheltered housing complex.
People that can't actually get out here can look out of their windows and see it, or they can sit down on the seats and enjoy the birds, and, to me, it's going to be so amazing.
So conservation work can range in scale from planting in your own backyard to trying to turn back the tide and protecting the coastline. Here on the coast by the Somerset Levels, like any man-made landscape, there's a bigger picture. Climate change could have a drastic effect if the rainfall gets any more intense in winter, or if the sea levels continue to rise. Sometimes there's just too much water.
The levels flood because the huge amounts of rainwater that fall on them can't escape into the sea fast enough. But if the sea level itself were to rise, out there in the Bristol Channel, then these defences here would be breached. Now, that hasn't happened in 300 years because of careful land management, spotting potential problems and taking avoidance tactics.
And that's what conservation is all about. But there are lots of other things that you can do if you simply want to appreciate the natural history of the British Isles. This is Glastonbury, in the heart of Somerset, and the location of one of our 57 walks through time, put together by our experts.
With just an ordinary pair of walking boots, you can get in touch not just with the history in your area, but also with the best natural history. Here in Glastonbury, for instance, there's a 2.5-mile walk that'll only take you a couple of hours, and you don't have to climb the Tor if you don't want to. Oh, come on.
While the series has been broadcast, a number of organised walks through time have been held right across Britain.
Time travel is just one of a host of events on offer in a special family event in Gloucester today. To celebrate the BBC's Walk Through Time weekend and Family Learning Week, the
BBC Radio Gloucestershire recently listened in as several troops of landscape detectives were led by a local expert around the centre of Gloucester.
This is Portland limestone. It comes from Dorset. But interestingly, you can see all the shelly fragments. It looks like a little squid. In actual fact, it's a section through an oyster shell.
They found fossils in the walls and even on the ground.
These ripples, and it's just like your beach back. If you go to the seaside, it's a fossilised beach. And you can see these are oscillation ripples. So the tide will be coming in and out, swirling, which gives it that shape.
God, it's blowy, but there's a good view. And what you see here with all these vistas is just what we can do when we set our minds to it. Now, 2,000 years ago, all this was soggy wetland, and now it's cultivated farmland, but in large areas being turned back into wetland for wildlife and to suit our needs. You see, the Somerset Levels for me point up the fragility of the British countryside. In the long term, it may be at the mercy of nature, but in the short term, the landscape is entirely in our hands.
One thing's for certain. After 3 billion years in the making, the British Isles will never stand still.